Well, hello there and welcome to the latest and final edition of the About Small Business podcast, the final one for this second series. We've now recorded 50 podcasts interviewing 50 owners from businesses right across the northeast of England. So really proud to celebrate that. Do you want us to do another series? Please do let us know in the comments. If you are going to do that, also please don't forget to like and subscribe. Well, in this 50th episode, I'm really pleased to be chatting to Sophie Dodgson from BeeSure HR. Sophie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast for me.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant. Right, Sophie, so HR. Now, I've got some experience of HR myself, but for people who don't fully understand the term, can you just give me a summary roughly of what it is you do?
Of course, so HR stands for Human Resources, so it's probably quite an antiquated way of looking at it now, to be honest with you. So many people have sort of tried to rebrand it to People Operations, People and Culture.
Right.
But essentially what it does is look after the management of all the employees in an organisation. Making sure that any policies and procedures and legal things are covered. So things like employment law, checking contracts, eligibility to work, things like that.
Big changes coming down the road as well, isn't there?
Yeah. And also, as well as that, there's lots of undercover stuff that goes on as well that not many people will see. And that is the advocating for employees with management and directors, trying to put incentives in place, looking at benefit packages, trying to keep things going in terms of engagement and making it a better place to work as well. So there's lots of things that go on behind the scenes.
Right. So now, I mean, I've mentioned to you already when we initially made contacts, I previously worked in recruitment. Does that form any part of what you're doing there?
It does, yeah. So there are lots of different specialisms in HR, and I'm a generalist, so I cover everything.
Right.
Recruitment being one of those. So you get people who are specialists in recruitment and talent development, which is the technical kind of term for it. But yeah, I touch on recruitment as well, and I did also I was also a recruiter in a past life for about a year. So that gave me a good insight. But yes, it's all about getting the job descriptions right, getting the adverts out there, doing the interviews, training managers how to interview and all that kind of stuff as well.
Right, I see what you mean. So fundamentally then, you're offering, I suppose, smaller companies that are maybe sort of waiting to take the next step up that aren't quite ready for an HR department. You can essentially take on that job for them.
Absolutely that, yeah. So anything from startups. Yeah. So there's startups out there going for investment and things, and they have to think about their people strategy really on in their journey. So I can help with that. But then also up to about 80 to 100 employees, anything in that kind of scope from micro business onwards, where they, exactly as you said, not quite at the point where they want to have somebody in-house specifically for that role, but do want to make sure they are doing all the compliance right, are getting all the bits and pieces done that need to be done, but also for employees to have that advocate within the business as well. There's a lot of things that people in HR do in terms of support and develop and everything else as well. So the softer side of HR, which is often overlooked a little bit, really. It's more of a pastoral kind of role. So there's kind of like two sides to it, really.
It's interesting you mentioned about that sort of pastoral side of things, because a lot of people are kind of opting out of work. Yeah. Or certainly opting out of careers. I'm hearing terms like quiet quitting. Which, for the benefit of anyone that hasn't heard that, is obviously people just turning up, doing the job and no more. Yeah. Whereas certainly I think people of my generation would almost be expected to be putting in over and above. Yeah. I mean, I worked in teaching where it's just part of the expectation that you're going to be doing a lot more than what you're actually paid for. Yeah. Whether that's right or wrong. So yeah, I suppose that really could be quite crucial, because I mean, as I'm sure you'll be an advocate for, a business is going to depend on its people.
Absolutely that. But there's also a massive cultural and societal change going on at the moment. And you've got to think we've got 4 generations in the workplace, soon to be 5 by 2030, which is kind of unprecedented, to be fair. And each of those generations has a slightly different expectation of what they should be getting from work. So you've got this real crossover of people of sort of our age who are used to being in that career where you have to give over and above. You're expected to do the job before you're given the job, that type of thing. But then you've also got the younger folks coming through, and it's more purpose-led. It's more of a case of, I'm giving you my skills and time, and it's a contractual thing. So rather than really driving for that career promotion, anything else, it's a case of it's a business arrangement between the employee and the employer, and it's changing in that respect. And it's really difficult to manage all those different types of expectations within a business.
Absolutely. I mean, in your view, then, what do you think the reasons for those changes are?
There's a number of changes, I think, and a number of things. There's the instant gratification type of thing. So things from like social media and being able to get things when you want straight away with minimal fuss quite easily. And that's kind of been then transposed into the way that we work and the way that we communicate with each other and everything else. But it's also a case of when people are looking for jobs and roles, people are thinking about, what about me? A lot more. That it's much more of a short-term view now rather than the long-term, and I think some of that will be through education, people coming through schools, colleges, universities, but also things like the cost of living crisis. People are having to think much shorter term about what can I do and get now, rather than thinking 10, 15, 20 years ahead.
I mean, certainly my observations on this are, I mean, you're very kind earlier on when you said our age. I think I'm probably a bit older than you.
Not much, probably.
But, I mean, certainly for my generation, I mean, I'm in my early 50s, and it would be, when I started out in the workplace, I'd left university in my early 20s, and it was an expectation that relatively quickly you would be able to buy your own home.
Yeah.
And that simply... particularly if you're down south, that simply isn't the case now.
No.
And I mean, I've heard, people the generation above me saying, oh, if young people worked harder, saved more, bought less avocado on toast and cancelled Netflix subs, and it's like I'm sorry that I'm not sorry actually. That opinion is just simply wrong. It's like the numbers do not back that up.
No, not at all.
It's like in terms of your salary. So I think for young people, there does seem to be that the rewards don't seem to be there. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned rewards or trying to encourage companies to include rewards. Can you perhaps maybe tell me a little bit more about what that might look like?
Yeah, I think companies have got a really difficult balance to strike at the moment and have done for a while, and it seems to be getting harder rather than easier. So you've got people coming into the workforce wanting the careers and wanting what the companies are wanting to give, but it's almost like there's a disconnect. So you've got the society that's kind of like, well, you should be able to buy your own home, you should be able to do this, you should be able to do that, and those kind of expectations. But that the money side hasn't caught up with that. And there's this huge disconnect between what we used to be able to want and achieve and strive for, and you'd be able to go out and get a good graduate job, be in a great graduate scheme that would be able to give you a fantastic career potentially. Obviously not everybody, but just as a sort of generalism.
There's something to aim for, wasn't it?
There was something to aim for. There was sort of a plan in life. This is where I should be. This is what I should do with my life. And I think the way that the world works now isn't built for that anymore. And as a point to that, there's also people in the generations that are coming through now, they're wanting much more flexibility. They're wanting more to their life than just working, going home, working, going home. And because they can't be buying the houses as easily, shall we say, as they used to be able to, that means that they want more flexibility. They want to do other things like go on holidays or travel or things like that. So there's just a big disconnect at the moment, and it's not quite. I don't know what the answer is. I wish I did, because I'd probably be a millionaire. But that disconnect isn't closing. In fact, I think it's actually widening.
I was going to say, I feel it is. I don't think it's getting better anytime soon. And I really don't know what the solution to that looks like. And as I'm sure you're probably more aware than most, like from an employer's perspective, you've still got those issues. You've got to deal with those issues because, you're trying hard to make the same situation in many ways work for you.
Yeah, and I think employers have got a bit of a raw deal, to be honest, because they're the ones that are trying to convince people that it is still achievable to strive for those types of goals with the types of wages and everything else that are available out there.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you get into a bit of a price war with employees, don't you? So either keeping or getting them, and that's where the difficulty is. But yeah, employers have got to, and HR as an extension of that, are the ones that have got to try and bring that disconnect together. But there isn't anything that can bring that together, so it just kind of like rubs together and is a bit fractious at times.
How are you managing that though? Because surely that's this whole issue. It's got to impact on you and your business.
It does, yeah. But for me, it's all about being open and honest. And at the end of the day, you're a person, and HR shouldn't just be seen as a function of a business. It should be seen as a person who is also employed in that business.
Yeah.
And that's what I really strive to. It's the whole know, like, trust kind of scenario. So it's building relationships with people, it's building rapport, and it's being honest. Obviously, you've got to be careful because you are privy to a lot of sensitive information from the business and from people. So you've got to be very mindful of how you have those conversations.
I was going to say, I noticed I had a quick look at your website and I saw the little ICO badge there, and it's, I don't know, I suppose, it's something that a lot of people forget, isn't it? But I mean, the amount of data that you are gonna
absolutely
see and be party to, that it's a lot of sensitive stuff. So I mean, in terms of your major work challenges, I mean, what would you say they were?
My major challenge that I'm coming across again and again, and it's an age-old challenge really, and that is there still seems to be the view that HR is there to protect the company and not be there for the employees. Or if you are there for the employees, then you're not protecting the company. It's a very, or seems to be seen as a very black and white type of role. You're either this or you're that. You're doing this or you're doing that. And what isn't done often enough is the grey that's in the middle. And that's where the best work can be done. That's where you can build relationships with people. That's where employers can work if they want to. And my whole ethos is HR doesn't need another rebrand. They've had rebrands to people operations and everything else. It doesn't work. It needs a complete rethink. It needs to be of value to a business. It needs to be able to evidence its value, which is very difficult in an intangible type of way of working. Although HR metrics and information and things like that with data are getting much, much better. But it's about businesses being able to see you as something that can help a business drive forward. And I think, unfortunately, some people have had either bad experiences or heard bad experiences.
I did want to pick up on just something you'd said, that just you talking about, like, sort of, you have to obviously support the employer, and the employee. Are you finding just that in a world that's increasingly polarized, are you finding that, because what I do find online myself, just when you express an opinion, you're either all in or you're all out, and I can only imagine that from your perspective, if you're trying to put forward the perspective of an employer, because you're not agreeing all out with that employee, they then perceive you as an enemy, and almost vice versa.
I think that comes down to the relationship that you've got with people within a business.
Right.
And if you're working as a remote service provider, that's very difficult to have those conversations because they don't know who you are. They don't know what agenda you have or anything else, which is why I like to get to know people in the businesses that I work with, ideally.
Must be hard, that.
It's incredibly hard. There's definitely some balances that have to be made in those conversations. But honestly, if you have an open conversation with somebody, and the big thing is explaining the reasons behind the why decisions are being made as much as you can, and talking to people in terms of just being human. You know, we all have to have difficult conversations.
Absolutely, hence human resources.
Exactly that. So if I was sat with somebody in front of me and I had to give them bad news, which sometimes I have to do, you do it with respect. And the same with different opinions, that polarization. It's fine to have different opinions. That's absolutely fine. Some people go, we're not talking about anything. That's not the real world. It's all about having respect for other people's opinions.
Absolutely. So we've discussed your job
Yes.
a reasonable amount. If I can maybe sort of find out a little bit more about you as a person, HR, as we've already established, it's not a term that everyone would know about, and it's difficult to imagine a young girl dreaming of a life in HR.
Yeah, very true.
So I mean, what did you want when you were a child? What was it? What were your hopes and dreams for the future?
I actually wanted to be a teacher.
Really?
When I was young, yeah, I really wanted to be a teacher. But then I went and got into technical theatre, of all things. So I was doing the sort of lighting and
All right.
everything else backstage. So studied that to quite a high level, and really enjoyed working with people.
Was this all at school that you got into this?
And up to university, yeah.
Right. Okay. So what sort of A-level degree choices did you kind of make then?
So I didn't do A levels. I did AS levels and then had a break, which was very weird at the time. Got a load of experience working in businesses and then ended up on a managing performance course, which was like the management of not-for-profit businesses and things like that.
Right. Okay. Well, what shifted you from teaching then?
I think it was because I've worked since a really young age, since about 14, and I just enjoyed the business element because there were so many different elements to it. Working with different people, having to have different skills, looking at different things, having to make quick decisions, but then also having to know about data. So it was really interesting to me. And I guess that's probably part of the reason why I ended up in the HR space, because it's still dealing with people and there's still that element of developing people in there as well.
It's interesting as you say that, because obviously I'm a former teacher myself, and a lot of what you're describing, it's now forming a part of a teacher's role, like sort of looking at the data. I mean, data is huge in education at the minute. My own personal opinion is probably too much so, I think, at the expense of the human element.
Yes.
But just a lot of what you're describing that you have to do in your day, I can imagine that had you gone into that profession, I could imagine you'd have been very good at it.
There'd have been some similarities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just, those little negotiations, sort of management and data managing, very difficult decisions, polarisation.
Yeah, I think as I got older, I also realised that I didn't want to work in a classroom full of children as well, so decided to go down the adult route.
And that's absolutely fair enough. So at university, then you were that was the course you were doing, and then how did you get into the sort of the technical arts side of things then?
So that was through the managing performance degree.
Right.
I'd always had an interest in sort of drama and things like that. I'm quite outgoing in that respect. Were
you involved in lots of like sort of productions when you were younger?
Yeah, I did. I did all kinds of acting qualifications and all the rest of it.
Right.
As well.
Okay.
So, a bit flouncy around on the stage and things like that. I used to love it, but then I went backstage because you get to that age where you all become self-conscious.
I was going to say, do you do anything like that now?
No, I'd love to go back to it sometime, but the stuff that I was doing with the lighting and things, it's all changed now. It's all digital and LED, and I was still working with halogen bulbs and things back in the day. So it's very, very different now, but I still enjoy
principles are still fundamentally the same, though, isn't it? Knowing how to light something. It's but it's still forming part of your personality and those skills that you would have got.
Oh, absolutely.
From the stage, which you could then go and enable you to.
I genuinely don't think I'd be doing what I do now if I hadn't come from that kind of background, because the things that I learnt about, about being able to communicate, being able to deliver things in front of an audience and that kind of thing, even down to having the confidence to start a conversation.
Yeah.
I can literally put that all back to the sort of drama and acting stuff that I did when I was younger. Because believe it or not, I am actually quite introverted most of the time. But as you do acting, you get used to putting a mask on.
Yeah, I think that is interesting. I've spoken to so many people who say the same sort of thing. It's like, there's a performance element that comes out. I think I'm probably a little bit like that myself. It's like whatever I'm doing, there'll be an act that I'll put on, and then sort of once the door's closed and like no one's watched, chill out.
I think it's an age thing as well, to be honest. I think
quite possibly
through my 20s and sort of 30s, it's a case of you try and portray yourself the way you think you should be portrayed, or how, especially as you're in pretty much all the time male orientated type of businesses, and you're one of, or the only female within that management structure, you kind of have a bit of a facade, really.
That's interesting. Have you found that then throughout your career?
Absolutely, yeah. But as I've got older, I've become much more authentic to myself.
Right.
And I think that's just because you just get more comfortable in yourself and more confident in yourself.
I think that's interesting.
More experience.
I think that you found that, because had you asked, I mean, I've not got any statistics to back this up, but had you asked me, I would have said, when I think of a HR professional or an HR professional in my head, as I picture that HR professional, it's very much a woman.
It's interesting because there are a lot of male HR professionals out there, and I think it is it's mainly seen as a female kind of vocation because of the caring aspect. Yeah, which is completely at odds as how people see HR sometimes. So it's a really strange contradiction in terms, really. It's
I wish I could remember the guy's name. There is a chap who's he's on social. He's a TikToker. He's basically an entrepreneur, but he's basically, his polite is to like sort of highlight terrible bosses. Yeah, and a lot of these stories get reported up to HR, which is I don't know, possibly giving you a
keeps us busy,
a bit of a boost, yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, in terms of, I mean, how would you deal with that though? Say, for example, that boss that has been really difficult and they own the business and they're just being downright unreasonable. Are you been self-employed? Because essentially, you may have a contract. I don't know how you set things up like that, but you are that guy's, I suppose, like estate agents. It's the seller that's paying the estate agent's wages. In your situation, it's the boss that's paying you wages.
Yeah, so, and I'm very careful in terms of who I take on as well, in terms of clients. So I always have a meet-up at least once, if not a couple of times beforehand, so they can get to know me a bit and I can get to know them a bit. There are lots of HR consultants and companies out there that offer support, and everyone does it in a slightly different way. Yeah. And I think the way to make that relationship work the best is to make sure that you are kind of in the same frame of mind as that person. Yeah. In my sort of employed life, I've worked with a few bosses who have been, I'm not going to name names, but have on occasion been quite difficult, shall we say? Yeah. Because it's your business and you want it to run a certain way and people to do certain things, and there are times, more so as a self-employed person offering that service, you've got to be able to kind of just tune in and say, I know you're wanting to do this, but ultimately you're protecting the business and them as a director as well. So you need to be able to say, hang on a minute, let's discuss this, let's talk this through. Why are you thinking like that? Where's this coming from? And where can we make it work? And there's also the little seed sowing bits that you do as well sometimes. But I think because I'm a qualified coach, that helps in that kind of, let's work through this, let's figure this out. Because often it comes from a frustration of some description.
It sounds like we've got quite an interesting career path going on. So, so the last I'm aware is we're working pretty much as a theatre technician. Yeah. Where did we go from there?
So to HR basically. So theatre technician. Was never employed as a theatre technician. It was always kind of
freelance work,
freelance. When I was at university, I was doing administrative work and then kind of fell into some HR work as well. Then did a little bit of sales and a little bit of recruitment. Right. And then from that recruitment, I was like, I'm going into HR. This is what I want to do. This is how I'm going to do it. And very quickly kind of grew a career in HR from there, even though I've now been doing it for nearly 20 years, which seems crazy now. But yeah, started doing HR, worked with a couple of businesses that had nothing in place or very little. So it was really a baptism of fire, to be honest. So I've literally learnt it on the fly and learnt it on the go back in the early days.
Yeah.
Studied alongside working and trying to put everything into place, so I kind of combined those two. And then each place that I've worked has added to that skill set, has added to that knowledge, has been a different industry, so different quirks.
So you have got that sort of broad spectrum.
Yeah.
What was the main inspiration to go for it on your own?
So it's a bit of a strange story. So it is something that's always been in the back of my mind that I would want to do. Is be self-employed, have my own business, run a business.
Back from when you were sort of university school, right?
But it's never the right time. I mean, giving up a well-paid job in something, and kind of putting it all on the line with a family and the rest of it, it's a big risk.
Yeah.
We were in a situation, myself and my partner, where we had some family bereavements, which meant that we actually moved up here to support my sister-in-law with childcare while she studied to become a midwife. And it was then that we were like, now's the time. If we're ever going to do it, me and my partner, if we're ever going to do it, let's do it now. So
what does your partner do?
Works at the Globe Theatre.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So,
right, okay. So you've got that theatre connection still. And
and that was complete chance, to be honest. But get to see lots of shows, which is good.
Excellent stuff. So you'd made that decision to go self-employed.
Yeah.
It's the right time. I mean, how long ago was that?
So I made the decision in back end of 23 to start it. Obviously notice periods and things like that. So actually started actively working in the business about March, April last year.
Right, so we've gone about a year then.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. That's fantastic. Are you pleased with the decision?
Absolutely. Without reservation. Don't get me wrong.
That's very enthusiastic, absolutely.
It's been challenging. There have been ups, there have been downs. There've rarely been the middle road.
It's just like I say, that was a very, very enthusiastic, absolutely. Yeah. What's behind that? What's the main sort of motivations behind that?
There's a few. One is that now I'm choosing who I'm working with to an extent, which makes a massive difference because I can put a lot more value into that business in terms of what I do.
I suppose in terms of those choices as well, if you're able to say no.
Yeah.
As again, whatever walk of life you're dealing with, people, some people can really drain you, can't they?
Absolutely. I think we've met a few of those by our looks right now. But it's one of those things where, I mean, HR is a varied role anyway. Yeah. So when you're working with several different clients at the same time, all in varied roles, it gets incredibly varied.
Yeah.
So you can't rest on your laurels. You've got to be on the ball. And I particularly enjoy that.
Right. So I mean, in terms of must have been quite an intensive year that you've had, and I suppose the lead up to it. What are the sort of main? What's made you think, oh, am I doing the right thing? What have been those main challenges?
Well, the first one, as always with any self-employed venture, is when you haven't got the money coming in, or you don't know where the next client pay is going to come from, or something like that. That's always the moment where you're going, what am I doing? I've got bills to pay, I've got a family to feed. All the usual things. There are also times when you really doubt yourself as well. As confident as you are in what you're doing and as enthusiastic as you can be, you see other people out there who are doing it exceptionally well.
Yeah.
And with the best will in the world, you still compare yourself.
I think, to be fair, you've got two types of people in the world, though. You've got people who doubt themselves, and then you've got liars.
True, very true. Yeah, I don't think. I think everybody who you meet networking is also business is great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure even when you get up to the multi-billionaires, because I think there's that thing, if you sort of aspiring, that it's like, I think a question that not enough people ask themselves is like, what's enough? What does that look like? Because eventually you're going to get there. But
I think it's a very difficult question to ask.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's for a lot of people anyway, certainly for myself, I don't think it's a fixed point. I think it's a moving feast. So it's almost like having those baby goals to get to where you want to be, but realistically where you want to be always moves.
That's an interesting term, actually, the baby goals. I think that is fundamental with any project, let alone business venture, you've got to look at what's attainable. I mean, the number of sort of anti-procrastination books that I've read and things like that, because you can tell one of my problems is giving that away.
I just find it great that you're a procrastinator reading a book about procrastinating instead of
that's
doing
it.
what you should be doing. I do exactly the same thing. So
again, I think it's a bigger issue that maybe isn't talked about perhaps as often as it should be, but it is just like that little goal, maybe just I think starting to say you're going to spend a minute on a task, just do that, and then you can tick it off your tick list, and then once you're doing it, you're probably going to stick with it for however long, which does work. Doesn't always work the actual starting.
No, it is difficult, or you can start but then not finish it.
Yes, absolutely.
But it is becoming, I mean, it's been around for a long time with Atomic Habits and all that kind of thing. But that
was one of the books I was thinking was fantastic.
Yeah. Well, Stephen Bartlett's just come out with the 1% Club, which is exactly what we're talking about.
Right.
And that is, it's almost a thing where you look at things daily and go, right, what can I do 1% better today? Or what's my 1% needle mover? And just doing little tiny things, and then by the end of the year.
It is quite right if you can train your mindset into all these little tiny things. Yeah. Do you know what does never cease to amaze me is like when we're looking at this self-development, self-improvement, how that's not drummed into us at such a much earlier age.
Yeah, I think, and I think a lot, as you can tell, because everything started with I think.
Yeah.
But the education system is flawed, I think, which is quite a big statement to say.
You're not. No, I don't think it's particularly controversial. You're not the first person to say that on this podcast. I mean,
many people I speak to, both in education and in business, are the same. The way the education system and the curriculum was created was back in the early 1900s to mid 1900s.
I know. It's like you read Charles Dickens' Hard Times, and there are very few changes. Or you go to Beamish, it's like I've just visited a primary school that's just like this.
I was listening to the radio and they were talking about kids doing their exams and they're not able to sit there for 2 hours and write for 2 hours because they don't do that anymore. But things aren't catching up quickly.
Well, it is an interesting one. I mean, because I did some work briefly as an English consultant. Really consulting. We're just basically sort of having to help out sports schools. And I do remember that it was a long time ago, but iPhones had just come out. iPods were still a thing. It wasn't just about the phones, but iPods were a thing. And people complaining, fellow coaches, and none of them have got pens. It's like they don't value pens.
No.
They don't forget their iPods. Well, no, they're not, because they value them. But, and this would have been, I'm trying to think, it would have been around about sort of 2010. And I put a question to a group of, I think, 4 or 5 English consultants, when is the last time that you hand wrote more than a side of A4 that wasn't just notes?
Yeah.
For a letter or for a story or a piece of poetry. I knew one of them wrote poetry. And we would all just go straight to the keyboard.
But then we're still expecting children to do that.
And it's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, it's a useful skill to be able to write and make notes, but then you can get by without it, frankly.
It's such an interesting time at the moment, because I think with all the technological advances and changes and the fact that it's so quick as well, it's almost leading us into a devolution state. So we're losing a lot of the skills and things that we used to use.
With that, I have to ask you, how much are you using AI in your business?
I have to be very careful about using AI because of the detail of the stuff that I do and the sensitive information that I use and things like that. It's really helpful if you're writing some kind of policy or some kind of document to be able to reword a little bit. So if you get those moments when you're like, I just can't think of that word. Or if you just want to say, can you make that read a bit easier or something like that? Or to research, to kick off research, it's really helpful. You've just got to make sure that you follow it up. So it's more of a time-saving tool.
Yeah, I think that's anything I've checked out, whether it's like ChatGPT for what it produces in terms of reports, scripts, whatever it might be, the PowerPoints, they're all a great start. They're all a big time saver. None of it, or the ones that the video producing ones, the illustration ones, none of them are quite there yet. It's amazing.
No, it's still early days.
Absolutely amazing. but none of it's quite there yet. It's coming.
Absolutely. A lot of people look at it as, oh, is this going to take over my job or whatever? And it's not. It's still a tool at the end of the day, and tools only work with human intervention.
That's interesting. Given your position, that's interesting you saying that.
I think it's true, to be honest. From what I can see, that yes, some jobs are going to change because of it. Undoubtedly. And there may be some types of jobs may become slightly more redundant than others, type of thing. But skills will change and new jobs will come through. That's how evolution works in terms of technology and things.
That's right.
But at the same time, I think a lot of people will be looking at it, and it's quite a scary prospect, is AI, especially for people who are older, like my parents, grandparents. But it's one of those things that we've just got to ride that wave and see where it goes.
Absolutely. We sort of went off on a bit of a tangent. I think I did, because you mentioned about your main challenges, like sort of just getting the work in. How did you deal with that?
Pure resilience and stubbornness, to be honest.
Was that, I mean, were you, in your position, your industry, is that lots of phone calls, lots of emails, lots of letters, leaflet drops?
So
advert in the Sunday paper.
You laugh, but they were. I'm not a huge cold caller or anything like that. I'm much more of a relationships person, so getting out there, networking, which was difficult to begin with because having just moved up here, I didn't really have a network in the northeast. It was all back down in Yorkshire. So a bit of a standing start, really. But yeah, massive on the networking, getting out there, talking to people, finding out what their challenges are in their businesses.
Whereabouts were you going for that?
Anywhere from Newcastle down to Leeds, so quite a big area.
Just
really.
any networking event that you could
initially,
get to.
Yes, until you kind of find the ones that you think are going to be most useful, or have people that you get good relationships with and things like that.
Do you find? I mean, for what you do, is that industry specific? Would you say?
No, not at all.
No,
the more general, the better. To be honest. I do go to some that are a bit more industry specific, that are a bit more tech related. Being where I am in the northeast, it would be daft not to, because it's such a growing area. But most. I
was going to say, do you have any sort of particular niches that you'll tend to find that you're doing a lot with?
I do find I tend to do more with tech, creative and cultural sectors.
Right.
However, because of my background being in manufacturing, medical supplies and pharma, it's automotive, it's a real breadth across different industries, and they all have people, so
And one thing I did want to ask you, we've got BeeSure HR, that's your name of your business, and it's very much the bee. Is there a significance to the little bumblebee? If you're enjoying this content, please do like and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to let you know exactly when another podcast's going to drop.
Well, BeeSure actually came from a conversation that I was having in a meeting quite some time ago now, actually. And I was asking a group of senior managers, what is it about HR that you find challenging? And one of them said, being sure what we can and can't do.
Right.
And that always kind of stuck and just kind of ruminated for a number of years. And that's what BeeSure came from. And then basically that snowballed into bees being all over my house. So
it's a great way to remember it, though, isn't it? And so moving forward then, like I say, you've achieved an awful lot in a year. Anyone that's managed to get a business up and running has got my immediate respect. What challenges do you foresee moving forward?
There's definitely going to be challenges with all the new HR stuff coming in. There's going to be huge challenges keeping on top of that, because there's going to be a lot that needs to be done. But I also try and educate people of what's coming through as well. So not only doing it, but also getting the word out there of what people need to do.
At the risk of pushing you on perhaps a political point, do you think it's too much too soon, or do you think it's much needed?
To some respect, it's much needed. And I think a lot of it is actually stuff that a lot of businesses are probably already doing, but maybe not formally, or would like to do, but maybe just haven't got round to doing it. unfortunately, with all these things, smaller businesses will find it more difficult than larger businesses. But I do think it's needed. I think the reform for employment is needed. But I also think that it's an awful lot to put on businesses in one go. It's a pro and con thing. There's a lot to do, but then it's done. I think the kind of the costs, the NI, the national minimum wage, all that kind of thing, that's a different story. And I think that is really going to slow down growth for smaller businesses and SMEs, which are the absolute backbone of the economy.
Which a lot of people either don't realise or forget.
Yeah.
But I agree. Is there, having undertaken the journey that you've done, is there any advice you'd give to someone looking to do something similar? What's throughout a couple of tips that you would?
The first one would be work smarter, not harder, because certainly, well, even sometimes now, to be fair, it's so easy to go all in. And it becomes all consuming, and especially if you're working from home and you've got the laptop there, you just end up doing bits and pieces, and then you're on it all evening. And what people tend to forget, and I forgot as well, and this isn't just me, this is from my whole network pretty much. You forget that you're the main commodity in the business, and without you, you don't have a business. So you've got to take care and take time for you, otherwise you're just going to burn out, and then you'll find it very difficult to get going again. And I think that is one of the reasons why a lot of businesses fail quite early on, because people just run out of steam.
No, I agree totally.
So definitely work smarter, not harder, and figure out what you're good at, and then find out how you can get the other things done, either cheaply or as cheap as you can, but still get the good stuff. Buy cheap, buy twice, as I was always told. But invest in the business by getting the best skills you can afford at the time, because that will help, definitely.
Fantastic. Well, Sophie, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you very much.
I'm wishing you all the success going forward. Thank you so much for being the 50th guest that we've had.
Yeah.
And thanks again.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.